Pro-life talk. Real world answers. This is Life Report.
Welcome to Life Report. I am your host, Josh Brahm, and I'm here with two of my good friends, Eric Scheidler, who's the Executive Director of Pro-Life Action League. Their website is prolifeaction.org, and we're also here with Timothy Brahm, training specialist with Justice for All. You can find their website at jfaweb.org. I am just so excited to have both of you on the same show together because we all have such common ground on the way that we should dialogue with people. So welcome to the show. This show was Eric's idea, and a couple of years ago, I think now, Eric said, we should really do a Life Report episode about this amazing speech I saw, and I'd never heard of this speech, but Eric sent me a link, and I watched this speech from a skeptic named Phil Plait, who gave a speech at the Amazing Meeting, or one of the TAM conferences, that it blew me away. In fact, I briefly referenced it a while back on Life Report, but we didn't spend very much time on it. But he gave a speech to an entire conference of skeptics that I think Eric and I both think there's a lot of takeaways from this speech that pro-life people could benefit from as well. So today we're going to be talking about this speech and some of the things that we noticed when we watched it, some of the things maybe we would say a little bit differently if we were applying it to the pro-life movement, and what are some things that we think really do apply to the pro-life movement. But generally, Phil was saying that we should not be jerks when we communicate to people on the other side. And he kind of sets up the speech by saying that, and this is his perspective on atheists that are interacting with Christians. He said, the tone of what we're doing is decaying. Instead of relying on the merits of the arguments, it seems that vitriol and venom are on the rise. So before we get into the other things he said, let me pitch a question to you guys. Do you think that would be an overstatement in regards to the pro-life movement, or do you think that pretty much applies? Do you think that vitriol and venom are on the rise and there's less good argumentation going on from your perspective?
Well, I don't think so. I think we have some reasons to be hopeful that our movement has not fallen into the same pattern as badly. Though, you have to really look at things very closely to tell what the trends really are. Over the years, I think the pro-life movement has been in such a position of defensiveness, trying to present our message to a world that sees abortion as a solution, and that increasingly sees life in the womb and other vulnerable forms of life as not as valuable. And so we've really had to be thoughtful and hone our message very carefully. At the same time, I think we've had an advantage that no atheist or intense skeptic could ever have, which is that we have the grace of the Holy Spirit helping us along. And so there have been very powerful and influential voices that have urged a tone of dialogue, of respect, of treating other people well, and thinking of our arguments as needing to be presented instead of just obvious. That has helped us along. That said, I do think in recent years there has been an increase in some corners of the pro-life movement towards a more vitriolic or angry or dismissive approach that doesn't consider any of the points the other side might happen to make to have any value at all. It's understandable. We're talking about the death of little tiny people in their mother's wombs. Of course, there cannot be a defense for that. And yet there are understandings of abortion, ways of justifying abortion, that even if we quickly recognize they're ultimately invalid, really are sincerely held by people, and we need to respond to those carefully as we can. And I think some in recent years have become more frustrated, and we've begun to see a more strident, denunciatory kind of a tone. And so I think the advantage for us now is to take what Phil Plait says about how we need to approach dialogue and really try to drill down into that and make it part of this movement before it's too late, before we get to the point where I think the atheists really are, where all they can do is insult and mock.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much with Eric. I think I'm generally optimistic. I think there's a lot to be hopeful about in the pro-life movement. But at the same time, I spend some time on Facebook here and there, and that makes me kind of concerned because there is definitely a segment of the pro-life movement that is getting more aggressive and more nasty. And there's something that Plait said about that I thought was pretty interesting, which is he thinks that one of the causes of the vitriol from skeptics is their frustration. They get frustrated at having to deal with the same bad arguments over and over, and they become more vitriolic and they react in this negative way. And I think there's a similar dynamic with a lot of pro-life people. I'm doing kind of speculation here, so bear with me. But I think there is a dynamic that I've sensed in myself of abortion's been going on for more than 40 years. That's longer than I've been alive. And the death toll is so high that can make us feel really desperate, like we need to stop this and we need to stop this right now. And I think that can give us an impulse to get more insulting and more nasty. But I don't think the solution or the right solution to us getting desperate and frustrated is the vice of rudeness and arrogance. I think it's the virtue of dependence on God. And I'm not sure what the virtue is for my atheist pro-life friends, but at least it's not rudeness and arrogance. It's often the case that when we get desperate, we get stupid. That's just, I think, true of life in general. I think we should be passionately trying to stop abortion. We can't throw wisdom out the window when we feel frustrated. That doesn't help.
Yeah. People who follow my work know that some of my work, not all of it, but some of my work has been a little bit corrective towards certain segments of the pro-life movement because I want us to be very persuasive. I want us to be effective. Effectiveness really matters in the pro-life movement. So it would be very easy for me, just because I get so frustrated when I see some of the things, whether it's on Facebook or the way sometimes people interact even face to face. It'd be very easy for me to make this broad sweeping statement that this totally applies to the entire pro-life movement. We have a huge problem, and just like make this very, and I don't think we can. I think what I see on Facebook and what I see face to face is only a small portion. It's somewhat anecdotal. So instead of saying that I know the trend is going this way, I think what I want to say is I know that there is a portion of the pro-life movement that struggles to make arguments without a caustic tone to them. And that's problematic because so Phil sets up towards the beginning of his speech. He basically says, okay, everybody who has ever changed your mind about anything because someone got in your face and screamed at you and called you an idiot, raise your hands. And of course, nobody raises their hands, and it's kind of like, well, why do you think that you're going to change other people's minds by doing the same thing? So what do you guys think that pro-life and pro-choice advocates can take from a concept like this? Is this only relevant to atheists, or is this relevant to people talking about abortion?
Well, I think that the fundamental point that Phil Plait starts out with is that for the atheist, they're presenting something that is really very difficult for people to swallow. They have a very tough message. He says, with everything stacked up against us, that is stacked up against us, why in the world would you want to make it harder to deliver the message of the skeptic or the atheist? I think we're in very much the same kind of situation. I mean, the atheist is saying there's no God, so this is the only life you're going to have. There's not going to be any ultimate response or answer to any suffering you may experience in this life, any purpose or meaning other than what you make up yourself. You can't count on the religious traditions. You can't count on the institutions. None of those things really have meaning. It's a very difficult message to say to people. And to Plait's credit, he acknowledges that and says, hey, we're offering something pretty tough here, but it's the truth and we need to let people know about it for their own good and for the sake of the truth itself. Similarly, what are we really saying to people when we say that abortion should not be allowed? We're not just talking about not allowing the killing of children in the womb. We're also talking about a whole culture of sexual irresponsibility, of a culture where you can't even drive down the highway for 3 miles without seeing a billboard that's going to be sexually titillating in some way. This culture is saturated really in sexual promptings at every turn, and that ultimately leads, through a whole series of dots we can connect if we need to abortion. The kind of world we're asking for, where children are really accepted from the moment that they're conceived as fellow members of the human family, and not just children, but all vulnerable people, the poor, the elderly, the sick. This is a very, very different world from the one we're living in right now, and it's demanding tremendous sacrifice from people for this world to ever come into existence. So we really have a hard sell, and so it's very important that we acknowledge that and that we proceed, to make that sell, as it were, gently. And I know there's going to be some people out there who say, "Sell, this isn't salesmanship, this is the truth." That's all true, But to present the truth, we have to be diplomats. We have to be salesmen. We have to present this in a way people will be able to receive.
I loved this analogy that Phil Plait gives when he's talking about how much is stacked against atheists. He said, I'm not here to talk about the actual toolbox of critical thinking. I'm here to talk about shop safety, I suppose. Everyone knows a hammer is for pounding nails, but not everyone knows how to wield that hammer. You don't swing wildly and you don't use all your strength because you might pound in the nail, but you're also going to destroy the wall. And sometimes a focused movement is more effective. Smaller swings that are aimed well, it takes more swings to accomplish your goal, but in the end you have a nail in the wood with minimal damage to that wood. I thought that was a clearer analogy to this entire situation than I ever heard before. Let me ask you something that's a little bit, it sounds a little bit off topic, and I want to ask you guys what you think. He said, how do you convince someone that they're not thinking clearly when they're not thinking clearly? And just real quick, because you both do dialogue a lot, what is your take on that? For pro-life people who feel like a lot of times pro-choice people, this isn't always the case, but we do talk to some people who haven't thought a lot about this before, who are making primarily emotional arguments if they're making arguments, and that can be very, very frustrating. How do you talk to people who don't seem to be thinking clearly? How do you convince them that they're not thinking clearly if they're not thinking clearly?
That's a tough one. And I think I really only have two and not very satisfying responses to that. The first is that I think sometimes we have to walk away from a conversation, always politely, never stridently, but recognize, because I've been in a situation where I've presented the same case over and over again. And it's not just the pro-choicers. There's sometimes pro-lifers too who disagree on strategy. And you say over and over again, you're already allowed to kill babies who are conceived and raped today. This isn't something we're proposing in our legislation here that would restrict abortion. You say that 7 times and they never respond to it, never ever answer it. At some point you have to walk away. And actually a very wise spiritual director said to me, Eric, you need to present your case twice as calmly and respectfully as you can. And then if you're still not getting any response, if the wheels are just not turning in that other person's brain in any way, and you can see this, you need to spend your time somewhere else. So one answer is to simply go for the low-lying fruit. Talk to the people you can reach. Another response would be to say, okay, you may not be able to change someone's mind because either they're a lazy thinker or they've got just such deeply entrenched bad ideas, or they're maybe a little bit insane, whatever the case may be. They can't get their head around it. You can still use that dialogue as an opportunity to show a respectful Christian face to the pro-life movement. Person may not have had their mind changed about abortion in any way, but they have had their mind changed about pro-lifers. And I think that's very important, because so much of what we're fighting against, and so many of the bad ideas out there that we have to deal with day by day, are bad ideas about who we are and what motivates us. So if we can walk away from that conversation with the person who can't be reasoned with, at least being connected with us in some way and recognizing that respectfulness, that human connection, and having some of those, caricatures and biases broken down, I think that's a great result.
Phil kind of talks about the bad state of affairs and the closed-mindedness in the atheist community. And Tim, you and I have talked about this even on Life Report before, but let's say a little bit about this. So Phil says, right now in this movement, so he's talking about skeptics, there's a lot of quote-unquote discussion. And he says, I say discussion because a lot of it involves name-calling. A lot of it involves insults. And there's entrenched belief masking itself as rational thought. That's so good. There's entrenched belief masking itself as rational thought. People strongly believe in skepticism so much that they're not willing to question it themselves, not willing to question their own stance. Tim, just engage with that.
Yeah, this is the kind of line that, for me, as I was watching this video, I watched it for the first time this morning, just found myself feeling like this guy Phil is like a kindred spirit to me, which is so weird because we have such incredibly different worldviews. But his
I still really want to spend some time with him, though.
Yeah, I'd have a beer with him. He seems like a great guy, and he seems like he cares about people and cares about being intellectually honest. And I respect that a lot. I think Phil illustrates well how to go about this in a different way. At the end of the video, Spoiler alert, I guess. I mean, you should watch the video. He tells this story about an interaction he had with a young Earth creationist in the audience of one of his talks. And the young Earth creationist was giving him some kind of basic responses that he'd heard a million times. And of course, he had a response to. He's an astronomer. And the way that he talked about how he responded to her, and he said that he could have insulted her and been really rude, and he wasn't. He was really gracious and polite. And I think that's really important. Something else that I really appreciated about what he modeled was he was encouraging her and giving her advice on how to think well, not just trying to tell her, okay, here, read this book and this will totally change your mind. He was encouraging her to, look in general for outside sources that disagree with you. If all you're doing is you're living in your own echo chamber, this is me using my words, not his, but that kind of idea. If you're just living in an echo chamber, just talking to people who agree with you, then you're a lot less likely to come up with true beliefs and reason well. And so he was encouraging her in that way. One of the things that I liked the most about it was he was really careful and humble about where his expertise was. This is not a dumb guy. This is not a guy that doesn't know anything about biology. But he was very specific that when she was asking biological questions, he was humble enough to say, that's not my field of expertise. You really want to talk to a biologist. And I think that's really important. I want Christians to have that kind of an attitude. Because to me, it seems like there's a natural response. If someone admits they don't know something, they've lost debate points or something. You wouldn't say that in a formal debate. But when you're in a conversation with someone, it's the exact opposite. When someone says, that's an interesting point, I think I want to think about that because I'm not an expert on that. To me, they gain a lot of credibility because that shows that they're willing to reason honestly. That shows they're open-minded enough to acknowledge what they don't know. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree. In the Pro-Life Action League, the organization that I'm the director of, in our little handbook, Sharing the Pro-Life Message, one of the effective tips I give for people on how to communicate the message is to admit when you don't have the answers. For pro-life people, a lot of times it's going to be facts and figures that you don't have, or an argument you haven't heard before. Just admit that. And a lot of times you can use that as an opportunity to re-engage the conversation. If you're not talking to some stranger on the street, but maybe, I remember when I was a freshman in college, I had a lot of conversations about abortion with some of the guys on my floor, the dorm I stayed at. We'd be able to return to the conversation later. Now, at that time, 18 years old, I wasn't the best debater in the world, and I could get pretty hot under the collar, even though I had a lot of great arguments. I wish I had some of the advice from this program that I could have listened to back then. It would have been very helpful. But in those kinds of situations where you can leave a door open, it can be, tactically to say, hey, let me look into that and get back to you. Now you've got the next conversation almost scheduled where you can continue the conversation and carry on.
So towards the end of Phil's speech, he basically transitions very clearly into this, okay, what should we do mode? And I love this thing he says. He says, the key to attaining our goal is obvious. It's communication. The best idea ever thought of is useless unless somebody communicates it. In this case, what we're communicating to people is not something that they necessarily want to hear. So our demeanor, how we deliver this message, takes on crucial importance. And then he says, is your goal to be adversarial or to win the game? And he says, we don't need warriors, we need diplomats. So I think a lot of people would hear Phil say, we don't need warriors, we need diplomats. And they would say, what? They're killing babies. This is a war that we're in, and we don't need a bunch of, we're just going to be a bunch of namby-pamby pro-lifers while babies are dying. That would be the response, I think, from a lot of people that are listening, because people that would listen to a pro-life podcast are probably pretty passionate. What would you say to people who hear that and say, no, we don't just need diplomats, we need warriors?
Well, first I'd say I don't think that we should be namby-pamby and weak. That's not my view. I think we should balance truth with love. And balancing truth with love is a difficult thing. And sometimes appropriate love is tough love. But I don't think that being obnoxious falls into the category of being loving. And I don't think it honors God. And second, I think there's an issue with the war analogy. I tend to try to avoid the military analogy with pro-life work for some practical reasons. but I'll just engage with it at what level it's relevant for this conversation. I think there is some way in which, yes, it's appropriate to say there's a war going on in our country. There's a war about ideas or something like that. I understand what they're saying. But I don't think the war metaphor goes very far. We do have a crisis on our hands, but in an actual war, you like attack people with weapons, and you do things like that. And that's not what we should do in this war if it's a war. If you want to succeed in the pro-life movement, you need to be diplomatic, not aggressive. I think we can be wise as serpents without biting people. And that doesn't mean that we're going to be namby-pamby.
Well, you know, I do use martial language a lot in the way that I talk about pro-life movement, and I think probably that's just something that, to some extent, I've inherited from my father, who's always used that kind of language in his many, many years fighting abortion. And there's some value to it. I think people can get very excited about the idea of, being in a battle and being warriors. And when you do something like, protest a big abortion providers fundraising gala where the police come out and you've got counter protesters, it does feel very much like a battle in a metaphorical kind of a way. And there's some value to talking about it that way and inviting people to partake of it in that way. But that's a very specific kind of pro-life work. Most of what we're doing is talking to people, whether it's talking to the companion of an abortion-bound woman outside of a clinic, whether it's talking to a classroom of students about this issue who may have never talked about it before, whether it's engaging in a private conversation one-on-one with someone at a big protest. In all of those situations, diplomacy is what's needed. And in every war, diplomats are essential. Wars only end because the diplomats get together and work out the arrangements whereby there's going to be some kind of a peace treaty. So, it's always a part of that martial experience anyway.
I think every single argument that I heard Phil Plait make in this speech about why we should not be jerks to people were all pragmatic. They were all, this is not effective. If you act like this, it's not effective. It's not going to create the kind of world that we're all going to kind of want to create. It's not going to get us to our goals. And I think those pragmatic arguments do apply to pro-life and pro-choice people. You want to have good dialogues about this. You want to actually persuade people, which most pro-life and pro-choice people would like to be able to do, whether they might not think it's possible, but it is, then those would apply. These are all good pragmatic arguments for trying to be as effective as possible. But for, I think, at least Christian pro-lifers, we also have these principled reasons for acting a certain way. I think we should actually love the people that we're talking to and not just see them as objects, not just see them as minds to be changed, not see them as just like a potential notch on our pro-life belt. And when we look at the way our greatest role model, Jesus Christ. Okay, so religion is happening for just a minute here. Bear with me, atheist friends that listen. But if we, our role model, Christ, when I see the way that he treated women, in a culture that did not treat women well, when I see the way he treated in that culture, the greatest sinners, or the people that were thought of as the greatest sinners, that's kind of my role model when I'm talking to other people. Is I don't want to just see them as, okay, if I get enough debate points and I change your mind, then I'm going to end up with this great story I can tell on stage or in Life Report. There's going to be a blog post about you. It's going to get me a bunch of views, and we're going to be that much closer to winning the war or whatever. It's like I care about you. And because I care about you, it would be very wrong. Like, it would actually be, I think, morally wrong to treat people in the way that I think Phil Plait is responding to the way a lot of atheists treat some Christians. Let me just jump to you guys with closing thoughts. Phil kind of ends his speech by saying, always ask yourself what your goal is. Before you leave a comment, before you blog, before you send that email, ask yourself, is this going to help? Or will this impede me from attaining that goal? Is this going to make me feel better? Or do I want to change the world? Final thoughts, Tim.
One final thought is, I think that Jesus did not have the conversation he had with the woman at the well just because that would make for a good story and John would write about it in chapter 4 of his gospel. I think he really loved her. And I think that should be a model to us. And I guess my general main thought from watching this video is the importance of open-mindedness, which we've talked about before and we've already talked about on this show. But I think that can't be underlined enough. I think Phil and the approach that he takes seems like someone who's, I think he thinks the truth's on his side, much more so than I do someone who's frothing at the mouth, whether they're a skeptic or an atheist or a Christian or a pro-life person or whatever. I don't think there's a good reason to resort to insults and stubbornness unless you're afraid that truth isn't on your side. I think if you think truth is on your side, there isn't a good reason to obfuscate that truth with these distractions. So we as pro-life people, if we actually think that we're right, if we actually think that truth is on our side and it's wrong to kill the unborn, we don't need this.
You know, I'd like to cycle back to something we addressed a little bit earlier, the frustration that you feel seeing those same tired arguments again and again. You know, for us in the pro-life movement, often those arguments are attacks on us. You know, every time I see an article on abortion at some of the more liberal websites like, you know, Mother Jones or Huffington Post, you know, within one or two comments, you're going to see, oh, how can they say they're pro-life? They like to kill doctors and, you know, all of this kind of nonsense. And you just want to bang your head against the wall because they're things I've been hearing this stuff since I was a little kid. But I think what we have to remember is that every person who holds one of those opinions, one of those, you know, stereotypes of the pro-life movement or spouts one of those tired old choice arguments or whatever it might be, they are a unique individual who, in a sense, kind of has a right to have a stupid opinion like that, and then to have someone address that opinion to them directly. You know, I've been frustrated and wanted to just, you know, post a link with all the arguments being debunked, or go read this book, you know, and then you'll have all the right answers. But no, that's my job in that situation, to present the ideas in that book or in that blog post or whatever that I might link to treat that person like a unique individual with whom I'm having a conversation right now, instead of just somebody I'm trying to switch around or you know, foist a link onto or something like that. Because every one of them is a unique individual loved by God. And in the masterful plan that he has, establishing some kind of a human connection in that situation might be what he really wants. Maybe what he's seeking by allowing abortion in our culture is for Christians to really be pushed to the limit in treating our adversaries, people who are defending the Holocaust that's going on in our country, treating them like we want to be treated, treating them like children that are loved by God. That's a challenge for us, and when we rise to that challenge, I think God is very pleased, and we do great things for the kingdom.
Eric Scheidler is the Executive Director of Pro-Life Action League. You can check out their website at prolifeaction.org. Timothy Brahm is not only my brother, he's also the training specialist at Justice for All. You can check them out at jfaweb.org. That is our show. Remember, you can always have a great impact on any conversation that you have if you remember to ask good questions, listen to understand, and find genuine common ground when possible. That's our show. Have a great week. Now go talk to someone.
You've been watching Life Report, Pro-Life Talk, Real World Answers. Life Report is produced by Right to Life of Central California. Visit their website at fresnoprolife.org.